Benefit from trusted clinical content and the latest medical research with ClinicalKey AI. Now offering individual, annual, and monthly subscriptions. Start your free 14-day trial today. Streamline your treatment recommendations and tackle complex clinical questions with our advanced AI conversational search tool. Designed specifically for clinicians and residents, access a wealth of knowledge from Braunwald's heart disease to The Lancet, all at your fingertips. Visit join.elsevier.com/free trial CKAI to begin your trial today.
Hi, I'm Lindsey Smith, welcoming you to Raise the Line with Osmosis from Elsevier, an ongoing exploration about how to improve health and healthcare. In over 500 episodes of the podcast, one thing we have not yet explored is how Osmosis fits into Elsevier's educational offerings, and beyond that, what role Elsevier plays in global medical education as a whole. Joining me to draw back the curtain to learn more about all of that is David Game, Senior Vice President of Product Management for Global Medical Education in Elsevier, a position that caps a long career in educational technology, both in the UK and North America. Since joining Elsevier 9 years ago, David has been responsible for driving the medical education digital strategy, managing a suite of products that includes ClinicalKey Student, Osmosis, and Complete Anatomy. He is particularly interested in the role of assessment and learning and how best to embed software within the many tools that students and instructors use to teach complex subjects. Thanks so much for joining us today, David.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Lindsey.
I'd like to start with learning more about your background and career journey. Can you take us through that?
Sure. I went to college. I read theology, which isn't a common topic, which I enjoyed very much. And after college, I knew that I've always enjoyed reading. I've always enjoyed books. I've always enjoyed what I suppose you call the life of the mind. And so I thought publishing was a great industry. And I was very fortunate. I got a job at a publishing company that must have been 200 yards away from the college that I went to. And I worked there for a number of years. I guess that the key moment in my career before I sort of got involved in this kind of work was I worked at a company called Longman, and it was just when digital media was starting, and we were just starting to do things like books with CD-ROMs attached to them, and like dictionaries on disc and all that sort of thing. And it was all very exciting. And then I moved to the US and I got a job in San Francisco working on a CD-ROM of the cathedrals of England, which I was uniquely qualified to do. Probably the only person in San Francisco qualified to do that. But it was a really great introduction to the world of online or digital media, what you could do with digital assets and so on. So that was the sort of the lead in. And then I worked for Dorling Kindersley in the very first CD-ROMs, the way things work, CD-ROM, which was a huge sort of, the beginning of consumer CD-ROMs, and then went on to work more in a sort of educational space. So I started with the kind of a joy of reading, and then it was more a joy of using different tools to understand things in different ways. And I think another one of the sort of breakthrough moments was there was a CD-ROM about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and there was this amazing thing where you could read it and you could listen to the music and you could understand the explanation, and they were combined together in a way that you couldn't do with a book, and you couldn't do listening to a record, and you couldn't do watching a TV show. All of a sudden there was this thing that you couldn't do that was made possible by this new technology. And that was really exciting. And that's what I wanted to do and been trying to do ever since.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really enjoy learning how colleagues came to find their callings and how all of these different journeys can ultimately bring us to the same place, which is where we are today. So, David, you've worked in education for a while now, and you also worked at Pearson's working on the online math program for students, young students.
Yes.
How has e-learning grown and changed over the years?
So, well, I think it's interesting because on the one hand, I think it's changed a lot. There are a lot of things that we can do now that we weren't able to do, back 20, 30 years ago. More people have devices. People are more able to use those devices. They understand those things. There are more different graphic technologies that we can use. But a lot of the ideas about how to use digital education, how to use online education to help for remediation, to help understand students' progress, to help students learn in a clearer, better way. A lot of those ideas have been around from the very beginning. So I think we're working towards building a better implementation of really some core ideas, because I also think that the essence of education hasn't really changed over hundreds of years. The idea is that you start off not knowing something, and through a process of self-learning and being taught by instructors, you get to a stage where you have mastery of that subject. And that journey is the same. It's just we're now slightly better at understanding the role of the student in that. It used to be kind of like you were told stuff and you had to just absorb it. You were like an empty bucket to be filled up. And now it's much more interactive process. But in the end, that journey is the same. So things have changed, things are different, but fundamentally the goal is still absolutely the same, which is to help people understand things so that they can use those things in their work, particularly in medical education, so that they can help patients. I mean, in the end, the whole purpose of this isn't that they pass an exam, but is that as a doctor, they can care for patients in ways that you and I would want to be cared for.
Absolutely. And I liked what you said there, that it has changed, but fundamentally it hasn't changed. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit more about what ultimately led you to Elsevier and how you would describe your mission in your current role. You head up all of our products for global medical education.
So as I sort of mentioned, I've worked in and around education for a long time, sort of digital education. Worked for a long time at Pearson. I worked at MIT for a while on educational projects. And Elsevier was sort of the really great next step for me, in the sense that Pearson's a very large company and it does all sorts of education of all sorts of different things. And that was, in a sense, my apprenticeship, where I learned the fundamental building blocks of digital education, how what tools you can use and how you could use them. Coming to Elsevier meant that I was able to focus all of that sort of foundational understanding into a very specific and incredibly worthwhile area of digital education, and one that's different in many ways from other types of digital education, because medical students are so sort of voracious in their desire to learn and so on and so on. So you're not relying so much on remediation and other sorts of things that you do in some other areas. So that journey kind of has been, I've been learning and learning and learning about how digital education works. And then I came to Elsevier and had this opportunity, which was amazing, to sort of shape, with all of my colleagues, this offering in a very, very sort of specific space. And I think that level of focus is really, really exciting, the ability to really, really understand an area of education. So that's the goal. And my mission, as I said earlier, education remains the same. The goal remains helping students go from a state of not knowing and not understanding to helping them on their way to understand things better, so that they can go on to become that amazing doctor or that amazing nurse. So the mission is really simple. It's what can we build that will help students and the faculty that teach them become great doctors and therefore care for patients. Fairly basic, but I think it's incredibly powerful.
It is incredibly powerful and such important work. And just a fun side note is that I get to work with David regularly. And I won't ask you to name any favorites on the show here, but we'll just leave it there at that. So Elsevier is known for our content, Grey's Anatomy, leading journals, but the company has evolved through the years and become a multimedia resource for students, educators, and clinicians. Can you walk us through that evolution?
Sure. The story of Elsevier is a fascinating one and a very powerful one, because firstly, Elsevier had an existence in Holland in the, I want to say 16th century, where they published Galileo, a fantastic, critical, scientific piece of publishing. And they published him because he was not able to be published in Italy. And then secondly, in the 20th century, Elsevier was reborn, publishing articles by Jewish scientists who were not able to be published in Germany. And so from that has grown this business. And I think that the journey that Elsevier has been on, from Grey's Anatomy, which is now in its 27th edition, I think, we started with print, but we started with print with expertise. I think this is the key thing about the Elsevier content, is it isn't just average content, it's exceptional content. And Grey's Anatomy is the book that if you walk onto the street and ask someone who knows nothing about medicine, what's the most important anatomy textbook? They'll say, oh, Gray's Anatomy. They know that. And it's because it's the quality is so high. But I think Elsevier has also sort of grown with the times. There's this transition from print to digital. What can we do with that thing that's in print that is better when it's digital? And we've grasped those opportunities. We look at things like assessment. There are things that you can do with online assessment in terms of understanding students' responses, being able to aggregate those responses so that you understand how a body of students respond to different questions. In terms of digital imagery with like 3D for anatomy, where you have these amazing digital images of the human body so that, as it were, every student has the equivalent of a cadaver that they can look at in their own time. So again, at every stage, and I was involved in some of the discovery work about, which online digital anatomy product we should buy. And this is just a natural evolution of Elsevier's position in the world of anatomy. We publish Gray's Anatomy. So what's the next thing that we're going to do? We're not satisfied to stay where we are and just do, oh, well, it's, Gray's is still an amazing, amazing book, but what's the next thing that we can do? And I think it's that journey of seeing the opportunity and understanding the potential of new technologies to improve the outcomes of students, of faculty. For me, the exciting opportunity that I've had at Elsevier is to take education, and we have a very strong nursing education business, is to apply to education the things that we've historically applied to, hospitals and other pieces of our business. Because in the end, the journey is from medical student to medical practitioner. And by being an important part of that journey, the medical student journey, we're better equipped to help with medical practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elsevier does have such a rich history. I think Elsevier's trusted content has really shaped our reputation. I think it's something that we all take a lot of pride in. So it's safe to say, David, that our audience is pretty familiar with Osmosis and what we offer, but perhaps less so with why it made sense for Elsevier to bring in Osmosis into their portfolio of educational products. Can you walk us through that?
If you think about Elsevier, and you're not terribly familiar with them, you think of them in terms of these sort of classic medical textbooks. So Dale, Kumar and Clark, Davidson's, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what Osmosis brought to the table, what we're super aware of is that over time, how students learn and the materials they choose to learn from have changed. And you have to know what you're good at, and you have to know what, as it were, you're not good at. Elsevier doesn't naturally have, I think, the sensibility that Osmosis has in its educational, video materials. And so I think if we'd natively tried to create the same sort of sense of engagement and, that buzz that the Osmosis videos have, I don't think it was kind of naturally in our DNA, but we knew it was a critical part of that learning portfolio that students need. So you're beginning to learn about asthma. An Osmosis video is a fantastic way to get into that subject, to start that engagement. It's not all you need, but it's a really great door opener. And we know that students love that visual materials. They love that more concentrated material. And so it made perfect sense as we think of our educational offering to add that type of resource to the portfolio. And also Osmosis brought in the person of Lindsey Smith, obviously that sort of engaging Osmosis culture. I think I would say that Elsevier was more of a faculty culture. That's maybe our sweet spot. And Osmosis brought more of a student perspective, a student sensibility to the work we're doing. So I think, it's a perfect complement to the things that we're doing.
For sure. Thank you so much for walking us through that. I want to talk about the rest of the portfolio at Global Medical Education. For those of you who don't know about ClinicalKey Student, it's part of the Elsevier family, and it brings together trusted textbooks, assessment, and learning tools in one seamless platform to students to support them and their success and help faculty track their progress. David, I know this one is near and dear to your heart, and you were responsible for launching ClinicalKey Student in 2018. Can you tell us why you launched ClinicalKey Student and how the product has grown over the years?
Yeah, so there are a number of different reasons we launched ClinicalKey Student, but I think the most important one was that we saw a need for a well-defined educational offering, not just what I would call a reference offering. A reference offering would be, here are the materials that you need to learn. But we saw this need for a suite, a portfolio of materials that could meet the student on their journey at every point of the journey. So it's insufficient just to have Kumar and Clark, or it's insufficient just to have Osmosis videos. What you need is this set of materials that enable students to engage with content, to assess themselves on that content and understand where they are in relation to their learning, to then be able to practice different modalities. So, with the example, we have clinical cases, where students can practice that diagnostic treatment journey that they will go on as doctors. And so the vision, the underlying goal is, and always was, from the very first day, we knew that there were multiple parts of this story. This wasn't a one-act show, as it were, where once we had, Grey's Anatomy online, we were done. We always knew that there would be assessment. We always knew that there would be anatomy. We always knew that there would be preparation for practice. And the goal is to build out this interlocking portfolio of materials so that students can engage with different pieces as they need them and when they need them, so that they can continue to grow on their journey. One of the things I'm really pleased about, one of the things that, when I look back over the nearly 9 years I've been here, is we had a vision and we've stayed true to that vision.
Yeah, definitely a lot to be proud of there. And I like what you said there about you saw a need that meets the student where they're at. And we developed a number of products to kind of help them through their entire journey. I want to talk about another product, Complete Anatomy, another standout product from Elsevier. Complete Anatomy is one of my favorite products. The 3D models and interactive tools are next level, and the team behind it is incredibly innovative. David, can you share a bit about the innovation that's gone into it?
Yes. So when we first acquired 3D for anatomy, the models themselves were incredibly innovative, incredibly beautiful. And we were happy to find out that on the desk of almost all of the 3D modelers who were building those were copies of Grey's Anatomy. It was kind of like, we kind of knew that, but it's nice to know that when they were building it, we were, different brothers from the same mother, as it were, that we all knew what great anatomy content was. And I think the latest phase in this is really, really extraordinary, because we have these beautiful models. They're amazing. And we've expanded this into a sort of immersive technology using our very close relationship with Apple to build things using the Apple Vision Pro, which is the Apple headset, which are truly the next generation of anatomy content that enable you to truly be inside the human body, to see and to grasp the human heart, rather than just looking at a 2D picture, or even just looking at a 3D picture in 2D, which is kind of what it is. It's like, there it is, and you can do this with it. You can actually now explore that 3D model from the inside out, and it is absolutely stunning. And I think the exciting thing is that this isn't just a cool trick. It's not like, oh wow, that looks really cool. One of the things we're really, really excited about is to find out, how do we really help students learn? And again, that this is the thread. It's always, what makes learning better? How does this tool work to increase understanding, to increase the ability to apply knowledge, and so on? So that's what's really exciting about that next step in the journey is, you have this cool tool. We can build these really, really amazing things. Now, how do we use them to make education better?
Yes, that's exactly right, David. And I had the true pleasure of testing out the Apple Vision Pro and Complete HeartX, and it really brings everything to life. So how do you see medical education evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, David, especially with the greater integration of AI?
That is a really, really great question, and I'm really glad you asked me. So firstly, medical education will change in relation to the needs of patients. Medical education isn't kind of an abstract thing that exists outside of the needs of patients. So medical education will obviously evolve to better manage an aging population, a population with more and more comorbidities, but also a population that is more and more managing its own health, that rather than being a thing to be acted on, patients are now active participants in their own healthcare. The biggest change that I see, and there's a 99% chance I'm wrong about this, is that the role of the doctor will change from being this sort of god in a white coat going, here, take these medications, do these things, to being a much more empathetic partner in people's healthcare journey. And I think what that will mean is that the people who we choose and who are chosen to go into the medical profession will change. Historically, it used to be that, you were in the top 2% of your high school and you went to one of the top 15% of universities and so on and so on. I think now we'll be looking for a different type of person to be a medical practitioner, where we're putting more emphasis on empathy, on enabling patient choices, being a team worker rather than being an individual contributor. A medical education will have to change in order to find ways to teach those new skills about empathy and about engaging with patients, which historically hasn't been medical education's strong point. I don't think anyone would say that doctors emerging from Oxford or Cambridge have been selected because of their high degree of empathy. They've been much more selected for their high degree of intellectual rigor. But I think now we'll be looking for an education that is more focused on that interpersonal interaction type of skills and the ability to care for patients and provide them with choices in how they deal with their health as well as their sickness. So in summary, medical education will respond to the changes in how medicine is practiced, which is a truism, but I think is quite important because medicine will change quite a lot, I think, in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, very interesting perspective there. David, I want to follow up on the greater integration of AI and see what you have to say about AI, as it is a very hot topic these days.
It is a very, very hot topic. And I think in the end, AI is a tool. AI is a tool like a screwdriver, like a hammer. AI is not magical. It's only going to do the things that we can imagine, is my fundamental view. And particularly in terms of education, I think we are challenged by the ability of AI to produce incredibly convincing sounding answers that turn out to be not quite so convincing. And students need to have sort of trusted content and a reliable foundation for their knowledge. I think there are ways in which we can do that, but my sense is that we're at the very beginning of the beginning of how we're going to use AI in medical education. I think we're beginning to think about ways in which perhaps AI can deliver better choices of material, the optimal piece of material rather than just a piece of material. So, for example, we know students look on YouTube for videos. I think AI can help us identify the best resource for that student at that point in their journey. I think that's an area we're really keen to explore, where AI, I think, can be super valuable. But there's the risk also that students just use it to get an answer. But medicine isn't about an answer. Medicine is about treating a patient who's a person.
Thanks, David. It's great to hear your thoughts on AI and how you're thinking about it today. And it reminds me of something we talk about a lot, about delivering content to students at the right time. As you know, Osmosis loves to fill knowledge gaps. Is there a topic you think Osmosis should make a video about to fill a gap that is of particular concern of interest to you?
Well, that's an excellent question, Lindsey, because as you know, I have just had a nasty attack of tendinitis. And here's my sling, and here's the bag of cold peas that I use to keep my arm cool. And I was looking for an Osmosis video about tendinitis and how best to treat it. And there's some stuff about joints and so on and so on. But I thought that could be, from a purely personal perspective, a really interesting topic. The other topic that I would be interested in learning more about is asthma. Again, this is more of a, I'm a lay person, I'm not a professional, I'm not a medical student, but those sort of things which explain things that happen to you in ways that you can understand in that great osmosis way that, make it really clear and are trustworthy. So it's like, instead of going to the internet and finding the answers completely untrue, you can actually sort of see something about conditions that affect you. So for me, tendinitis would be thing one.
Okay, great advice. I'm making a note to get this over to our content team. So I want to ask you, what is next for you and global medical education?
the next stage in our journey, and this is, it's always within grasp, but it's always slightly outside of your grasp, is we just want to keep making the tools that we're building, the content that we're building, more and more appropriate and applicable for students. Have this vision of students being able to use all of our materials in a really, really joined up way together. And I think also what we think about is, what are the best materials for students to learn from? And we hear this all the time from students and from faculty, that no one reads textbooks anymore, and so on and so on. So we want to think about what are the most trustworthy, reliable, effective types of materials that we can generate for students to help them actually learn. Because we see a lot of things on the internet that we think are interesting, but not necessarily just as trustworthy. They don't have that depth of expertise that our content has. But we want to make sure that students find learning from our materials engaging, efficient, and that align with how they live their lives and do their work. So for me, the next step is bringing everything together in that really easy to use way and trying to figure out what the next best types of content for students to learn from is.
An exciting time indeed for global medical education. For my last question, David, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share any wisdom about medical education or touch on anything we might have missed in this interview. What do you have for us?
I was very lucky. I had the most amazing education. And I believe that the key is you have to engage with something bigger than yourself, something more important than you. And medicine is clearly that. And so I think if I have any wisdom to offer, it would be that if you're engaging with a topic that's greater than yourself, and medicine is obviously that, you will have a lifetime of satisfaction because you will always be serving something that has more to give than you can ever give to it. I think we all know from our interactions with doctors and from nurses that the joy that you can bring to people through the practice of medicine can't be counted, as it were. And so that's all I can say on that subject is, enjoy your passion for the things that you care about. And the more you invest, the more you'll get back.
Great wisdom. David, as usual, engage in something bigger than yourself and you will have a lifetime of satisfaction. David, thanks so much for joining us today. Your insights into the evolution of educational technology and the innovation behind our global medical education portfolio were incredibly valuable. From launching ClinicalKey Student to now leading product strategy, your impact on medical and nursing education have been inspiring. We're excited to see where your leadership takes the product team next. Thanks again for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm Lindsey Smith. Thanks for checking out the show. Remember to do your part to raise the line and strengthen the healthcare system. We're all in this together.
If you like this podcast, please share it on your social channels. You can also subscribe to the series and check out all of our episodes at osmosis.org/raisethelines podcast.